Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 24th, 2018. Time for another show. So far, just checking all my limbs and extremities, everything here so far. Good news, by the way, in case something was missing. I see somewhere back there in my feed, and I guess I'll scroll down to find it. I didn't think I was going to go to this story, but big news. It's big news in gun fail world. Doctors at, I think, Johns Hopkins medical centers, and where else, really, would honestly they be able to perform such a task? Don't really know how it broke so widely in the news, but I guess the first successful, if you can, use such a term, it says right here, Hopkins Med News, total penis and scrotum transplant, the first one in the world. So fantastic. It looks like they have some computer animation, which I really don't think was absolutely necessary in order to get the point across about this. I think most people, basically just by telling them, the long-awaited news that the first total penis and scrotum transplant, by which we mean, of course, a kidney transplant, but it was put into a guy who many people have said is a total penis and scrotum. But the other kind is coming soon, I'm sure, too. I don't really know, how this got to be such big news. I don't know how they came to think that doing a 3D animation of what happened. I haven't really even looked at the animation. And you can imagine why. Really, it's just a little off-putting, I guess. Even if, the subject isn't genitalia, which ordinarily, hi-yo, for a morning presentation is difficult to watch anyway. But it's surgical in nature, and they are in fact illustrating the surgery, and so you think, oh, I'd like to see a total penis and scrotum transplant, I'll watch, and then it quickly turns into, oh, I didn't know they were going to cut this person open from the belly button down and just remove the front skin and fat wall that comprises the front of his torso. But that's the surgical game, gang. And if you want to watch, you're just going to have to sit through it. So that was a bit of an awakening. And I haven't even watched the rest of it. It's a minute and 20 seconds. 12 seconds was where I got to before I said, holy moly. And then they're switching over to the transplant donor, who I assume is dead, but maybe not. I don't know where this is coming from, and I'm not turning on the sound to find out. But there you go. They're just cutting off the same portion of the other person, and then they turned the thing around to show all the wiring is still hanging out the back here. They're arteries, of course, but shoo, that's some medical history, and I'm watching it. And by the way, look at all the lovely, delicious globules of fat clinging to the back of the stomach wall there. It's terrific breakfast viewing. I recommend it to everybody. If you missed it, wait for our our summary of the show with Scott later today. Or you could scroll back 18 whole hours in my feed and take a look at it. I retweeted it because it's huge news for gun fail, of course, because people are constantly accidentally shooting their penises off, by which I mean detaching them with bullets, not anything else. And you shouldn't think that. And I think it's a game changer for, I don't know. I guess is that a game? I have no idea. It's something. And Johns Hopkins announced it, so it's medical news, and there's nothing you can do to stop me from walking around talking about total penis and scrotum transplants, no matter how hard you try. So there you go. It's not that far back. I didn't do a whole lot of overnight tweeting, so a couple flicks of the thumb, and you'll find your way down there, and then you too can be put off your breakfast by a computer-animated total penis and scrotum transplant. Remember, we are sponsored by Total Penis and Scrotum for all your penis and scrotum needs. Total Penis and Scrotum in downtown, I don't know. Is there a funny town that I could put this in? For some reason, I thought Jessup, Maryland would be the place to put it. It's not funny in its own right. It's just a town. And I don't know. I feel like they deserve it. Not sure what that means. So where would you put that? I guess is the question of the morning. We'll move on to other subjects. I swear, Daily Kos Radio is live now for all, again, your total penis and scrotum transplant needs. However, Bill had different ideas. Not that he isn't possibly changing his mind right now, but Kagro X proclaims, he says, let he who has not hidden behind shell corporations to make a killing in federally insured real estate holdings cast the first stone. And I have a suggestion about who might be a good subject to cover such a story. How about Sean Hannity? Speaking of total penis and scrotum, Sean Hannity is back in the news, and it seems like, as somebody put it in their headline, his association with Michael Cohen may end up being his undoing. It's going to take an awful lot to undo Sean Hannity. Unwinding the Sean Hannity debacle could be more complicated than we think. But story developing. I mentioned yesterday, and we, once again, practiced the good news eye and let you know that this was happening. More developing on that front today. And let's turn to John Swain's latest. He was the one reporting this for The Guardian yesterday, but I think we have some updated reporting on this. Let me just check the date line on this. Yes, okay, so it is dated for today, so it's the latest. Sean Hannity's real estate venture linked to fraudulent property dealer. It's gotten worse. Shell company tied to the Fox News host bought homes through Jeff Brock, who was charged in 2016 with fraud and conspiracy for his role in a scheme to rig auctions on foreclosed properties. So now the big question is, was that Michael Cohen's $10 legal advice to Sean Hannity? He said that they only had the most basic of relationships, that is to say, whatever it takes to keep it a secret, i.e. the bare minimum necessary in order to invoke attorney-client privilege, is what we did. And anything more, i.e. anything that will get me in more trouble than that, is not what we did. And he's hoping to have that cake and eat it too. But instead, we're finding this out. My question is, was this the legal advice that Cohen gave him? Either do it this way, or I've got a guy for this, use my guy, talk to Jeff Brock. He's the man when it comes to saving you money through fraud. So, we'll find that out eventually. Sean Hannity's real estate venture bought houses, John Swain reports, through a property dealer who was involved in a criminal conspiracy to fraudulently obtain foreclosed homes, according to records reviewed by The Guardian. And we'll presume that John can read, and read well, so that his having reviewed these documents for The Guardian is yielding valid results. In 2012, a shell company linked to the Fox News host bought 11 homes in Georgia that had been purchased by the dealer, Jeff Brock, following foreclosures. People do make a living out of this, just going and snapping up homes in foreclosure. And if you watch reality TV or HGTV, you will see house flipping is it's made out to be a great way to make lots of money quickly. I don't know whether that's really true, but that's what they like to sell it as. Brock transferred the properties to corporate vehicles that sold them on to the Hannity-linked company at a profit. That would be flipping. Brock pleaded guilty in 2016 to federal charges of bank fraud and conspiracy for his role in an operation to rig foreclosure auctions between 2007 and 2012. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and had to pay more than $166,000 in fines and restitution. Ordinarily, the house flipping game, of course, the one you see on television is, well, at least the one you see on HGTV, Home and Garden Television, for those of you who either don't get the channel, don't care, live in another country, or think I'm saying HD high definition television. Home and Garden magazine runs a television network, and they love to prominently feature these sorts of shows. The idea of which is to flip houses by buying homes in foreclosure, fixing them up, redecorating them, and then selling them at a profit because they're taking, one, a foreclosed and distressed property, and two, making it look nice and making a value for the purchaser and selling at a profit. I think other places you'll see people pitching you on the wisdom of buying and flipping houses on the financial networks, or the get-rich-quick infomercials might have a different focus. They probably say on television, with a couple bucks worth of paint, you can flip a house. But more often than not, they're probably not even telling you, don't bother flipping the house. Just buy it at foreclosure. In other words, buy low, sell high. You don't even have to sell it at a premium price that a fully refurbished home might be able to fetch on the market. You can buy a foreclosed home usually for peanuts. And, of course, you can definitely buy it for peanuts if you rig the system. But you can buy it for a lot less than it's worth and do nothing to it and put it back on the market and sell it and make a profit. But what if you could guarantee that you could buy those houses for far less than they would otherwise ordinarily sell for at auction? Then you would make an even bigger profit. But you might also be convicted of fraud and go to jail. And I guess that's what Brock's game was. Some of the houses sold on to the Hannity-linked firm in 2012 had been acquired by Brock from banks, later named by prosecutors among his victims. But the Justice Department declined to identify specific properties sold in the rigged auctions. Hannity has not been accused of any wrongdoing, and there is no evidence that he was aware that Brock was involved in fraud. Until we, of course, find evidence that Cohen said, call this guy, he's involved in fraud, which means you'll make money. Christopher Reeves, an attorney for Hannity, said the Fox News host was not involved in choosing the houses bought via Brock and, quote, has no knowledge whether these properties were involved in the fraud. You could probably read that, since Hannity is who he is, as meaning that Hannity was involved in choosing the houses bought via Brock and had knowledge that those properties were involved in fraud, but we'll wait and see. Reeves said neither Hannity nor the company used to buy the properties had any knowledge regarding Mr. Brock's wrongdoing before being informed by The Guardian on Monday. An attorney for Brock, Don Samuel, said in an email, Jeff has nothing to say. And he also probably should have said Don also has nothing to say because Don lost the case for Jeff, and Jeff is in jail I guess he's out of jail now, 6 months in prison in 2016, and he had to pay $166,000. Although Don Samuel probably very proud of himself. In all likelihood, he got the sentence reduced from, 6 to 8 years in prison and $1 million in fines. Who knows? The company linked to Hannity was one of a group identified by The Guardian on Sunday that spent $90 million buying more than 870 homes in 7 states over the past decade. Hannity was confirmed as the hidden owner behind some of the companies and has not disputed he is the owner of all of them. Hannity defended his real estate investments on Monday, stating in a post to his website that he had chosen to invest his personal wealth in communities that badly needed such investment. I'm sure that was the reason. And that he had limited involvement in the venture's day-to-day operation. So he's a slumlord. The fact is, these are investments that I do not individually select, control, or know the details about, except that I obviously believe in putting my money to work in communities that otherwise struggle to receive such support, Hannity wrote. That is a convenient excuse, isn't it? In February 2012, the Hannity-linked company spent about $540,000 buying 10 single-family houses in Georgia's Fulton, Cobb, Clayton, and DeKalb counties, according to county records. He bought an additional DeKalb County property later that year for $60,000. The company was formed in Georgia days before the February purchases by an attorney for Hannity. It was registered to the offices of Hensler Financial, Hannity's wealth managers, as a limited liability company, an LLC. Of course, it was not required to report its actual owner to Georgia regulators. Hannity is not mentioned in the company's publicly available filings. Brock had bought the 11 Georgia houses in foreclosure auctions in 2011 and 2012 after the previous owners defaulted on mortgages. He transferred the properties to 5 LLCs, Brock was the registered agent for 2 of the 5 LLCs, and a colleague at Key Property was the agent for another. Then the Hannity-linked company bought the houses from these 5 LLCs, paying a total of $600,000. Where payment information was clear in the records, it indicated that the sales created significant profits. One 4-bedroom home in College Park that Brock bought for $14,000 in January 2012 was sold to the Hannity-linked company for $47,000 the following month. Another in Forest Park, for which Brock paid $19,000 in October of 2011, was sold on for $55,000. Now, on to what did Brock actually do? U.S. prosecutors said that during the period in which he was buying the properties, Brock and 2 co-defendants were running a scheme to rig foreclosure auctions. You might have guessed that from the fact that he was paying $14,000 for a 4-bedroom house. So what was the scheme? People would bid to buy homes that have been, of course, repossessed by mortgage lenders. The men agreed not to compete on property sales, so one could win the auctions with artificially low bids, according to charging documents. The winning bidder would then give payoffs to the others to reward them for not having competed. Your basic auction fraud. When asked for details on specific houses bought in the rigged sales, Jeremy Edwards, a spokesman for the Justice Department, said in an email, as a matter of policy, DOJ does not disclose that type of information. Maybe the House of Representatives can subpoena it. Reeves, Hannity's attorney, said the Fox News host and the company used to buy the houses ceased doing business with Mr. Brock and Key Properties in 2012. Brock was released from the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, a medium security facility, in June of 2017, according to federal records. He remains under the supervision of a probation officer until 2019. As part of Brock's plea agreement, he has agreed to cooperate with U.S. authorities on related investigations and any new inquiries arising from them. Ooh, I have one. Talk to me. Federal officials said Brock was at the time of his plea one of 20 people who had been charged as part of a major investigation into corruption around property foreclosure sales in the Atlanta region. These defendants conspired to corrupt foreclosure auctions that should have benefited lenders and homeowners, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General Renata Hesse, does she pronounce it like Germans do, who is head of the Justice Department's Antitrust Division, said in a statement at the time. Special Agent J. Britt Johnson of the FBI's Atlanta Division said, by the very nature of this criminal act, the bank, and more importantly, the homeowner in financial distress, are the victims that these federal laws were created to protect. So time out. We'll rewind it back to the bit where Hannity swears he's an awesome fellow and not hurting anybody at all. Remember that statement was, I didn't individually select, control, or know the details about these homes, and that's possible. Except, he says, I believe in putting my money to work in communities that otherwise struggle to receive such support. Now, it should be noted that such support equals fixing the foreclosure auction so that people who have lost it all and their only remaining hope, I guess, is that the house fetches a decent price at auction so that the debt, if any, is settled. Although some people, I guess in some of these cases, you're just talking about turning in the keys and saying, well, I don't owe you any money, you're collecting the collateral. But I don't know if everybody actually gets away with that. If you're totally underwater and the bank sells the property, I don't know if that's necessarily just the final settlement of the issue. Excuse me as I drop some hardware that's sitting around here. And all right, anyway, yeah, I have some of this hardware. I'm going to go fix some of these houses and flip them today. That's a great bargain. A lot of people can't come up with $14,000 to do this, but I suppose if you have investment money, and not necessarily major league investment money, I suppose that's the thing. If you could get a house for $14,000 and sell it the next month for $50,000, well, like they say on the television infomercials, that would be a pretty good way to make money and not work very much. That's not particularly American, but okay. It is, however, the American dream. But look at what he's saying here. I obviously believe in putting my money to work in communities that otherwise struggle to receive such support. So what support has the community gotten? It has gotten $14,000 for a home that Sean Hannity, by all accounts, believe is worth at least $47,000. And the community got lots of help from this other house, $19,000 that was paid for it, that Hannity thought was worth at least $55,000. Now, when Hannity comes riding to the rescue, does the $47,000 go to the community? No, it doesn't. It goes to Brock. Does the $55,000 go to the community? No, it doesn't. It goes to Brock. Does the $14,000 or the $19,000 go to the community? Not really. It goes to the bank. Though, again, I suppose it's possible, depending on what the situation is, that is $14,000 and $19,000 worth of debt relief to the extent that the bank no longer is coming after the homeowners. If things are going right, they may also be fraudulently pressing the homeowners for the full bill anyway, as opposed to simply saying, well, we'll trade the deed for whatever we can raise from the sale and just leave it at that, and you leave and you don't owe us anything. I can't imagine anybody being let off the hook like that. But I don't deal in real estate law. I have no idea exactly how foreclosure actually runs. But there's the deal. The community that, was so hard pressed for Sean Hannity's investment dollars didn't get squat. They got $14,000 paid to the bank for a house that was worth at least $33,000 more, according to Hannity, who bought it only thinking, the only reason he bought it is he thought he could sell it for even more. So he was watching this community get ripped off and then hoping to participate in the rip-off. At the end of the line, if all Hannity does is then flip the house and sell directly to the next owner-occupant of the home, at the very best, he sells at some price higher than $47,000, but lower than the going market rate, whatever that might be, and therefore benefits the community by selling to them at less than the going rate. But of course, one, imagining Sean Hannity doing that is difficult to believe, and two, Hannity himself would probably tell you, yeah, there's no chance I'm going to sell at less than market rate. That was why I invested the money there. So this idea that he was helping the community is, of course, pretty much nonsense. You knew it instinctively, but I thought we might just take a minute to parse it and illustrate exactly how it not only doesn't help the community, but probably actually drains significant amount of capital from the community. So Sean Hannity is a stinking liar, and you probably shouldn't forget that. Then you'll be able to analyze all the next stories on your own, and you won't need my help. And that's good because, whatever. I ain't going to give you any more help. Oh, here's a funny thing. Oliver Willis tweeting this pair of pictures around. Yesterday, big day for Mitt Romney on the news. People were enjoying watching him take in a Utah Jazz basketball game. And I don't even remember who the hell they were playing. But it was a big deal because everybody thought, oh, how fun it is that he's there enjoying the game and waving his hands around and cheering like a real human boy. And that was so super fun. And so then they also have a picture of him. He has obtained at some point during the game a Utah Jazz game jersey and is wearing it over his button-down blue Oxford shirt and looking like a goofball. But he's being a man of the people or whatever. Oliver Willis, of course, now retweeting the tweet of Don Van Natta Jr., senior writer at ESPN magazine, noting all politics is local. Side by side, of course, a shot of Mitt Romney, a younger Mitt Romney, at the game, but also likewise in a bluish button-down shirt, getting ready to. What's he got there? Has he got the fan? I don't know what towel sort of thing there with printed on it a hashtag, as a matter of fact, I am a Celtic. He's of course in Boston during his time as governor of Massachusetts at the game and enjoying his Celtics fandom, and now of course he stands for Senate in Utah, and he's a big Utah Jazz fan. It would be funny if they were playing the Celtics in that game. I don't know. Maybe they were, and that's why it's so funny to see it side by side. I don't know. You tell me. All right, let's see. What else is happening this morning? I can comb through my Twitter feed and Pocket and front page of Daily Kos and your comments and find more to chat about, no doubt. And we'll do that, too. And, let's see. Let's get the Twitter feed open this morning. Because another thing that was much discussed this morning, man. Oh, there's Bill quoting our startup comments of the morning. Speaking of scrotums, Sean Hannity is back in the news. Glad we could entertain you with that one. Let's see. Oh, yes. The Waffle House shooter has been caught. And you'll be pleased to know that, as predicted, he was taken peacefully. He was not shot by the police. And I believe he has been granted $2 million bond, although it doesn't look like he has necessarily made bond yet. But they're going to let him walk out of there in exchange for $2 million. But gee whiz, hopefully he'll come back and his totally responsible parents will make sure he makes his court date because, you know, they probably feel so bad about having given him his guns back and his, you know, wandering off into a Waffle House and murdering people. But there you have it. At any rate, it is time for us to take our first break, and we haven't even gotten to the exciting news of Dr. Ronnie Jackson being under fire now. Of course, I guess this was inevitable. Ronnie Jackson, the Rear Admiral in the Navy, who is assigned as White House physician, who agreed to tell the world that Donald Trump was 239 pounds and therefore not obese, etc., etc. And as a result, I guess, got nominated to head the Veterans Administration. And wow, nobody thought he was qualified for that, and guess what? They dug into it and found out they were right. We'll bring you up to speed after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just needed to take an extra break for a sip of water. One of the things that I noticed about the writing on Hannity yesterday, and I didn't see that we hit it in any of the mentions yesterday, and maybe does this one have it? Matt Pierce, whose name I am not sure whether he pronounces it Pierce or Purse or Pierce, the way I meld the two of them together, Pearce. And one day I'll meet him and ask him, but he has teamed up here with Stephen Battaglio, who may or may not pronounce that G, Battaglio, in the LA Times to write another piece, this one from yesterday afternoon. Fox News host Sean Hannity's real estate holdings draw scrutiny. Is this the one that, yeah, this is the one that adds another dimension to Hannity's dealings and all this. And this also might not be awful all by itself, but in combination with some other things, well, it calls a lot of his, you know, the way he conducts his journalism into question too. Here, this one reads, on February 6th, conservative media personality Sean Hannity brought his longtime financial advisor William Lako, L-A-K-O, on his popular radio show to talk about money. For 25 years, you've watched me start with nothing, right? Pretty much, Hannity asked Lako. Yes, I did, replied Lako. Of course, I mean, I understand he's been paid something like $30 million by Fox News for several years. So really, even if he didn't do any investing at all, he'd be a pretty wealthy guy. So I don't really know how celebrated he ought to be. But if he also is a good investor, well, then perhaps it's worth taking a look at. If you don't care morally what investments you're involved in, you might be interested. So he brought his longtime financial advisor, William Lako, on his popular radio show to talk about money. And that's, I guess, the next interesting part of all this is that he would give plugs to his personal financial advisors, which, you can sort of understand. Like, I use this guy, and he's really good, and I think he's knowledgeable, and everyone should hear about him, and he should make lots more money by selling financial planning services to the rest of you people. But I wonder sometimes whether he gets any sort of a deal on commissions or whatever, or gets favorable investment vehicles directed his way in exchange for those plugs. But again, I don't think it's illegal. It's just something you should disclose if you're honest on your show. But anyway, so he goes on saying, oh, for 25 years you've watched me start with nothing, right? Pretty much. I'm so good. Yes, I did, replied Lako. Since Hannity started investing with Lako's Georgia-based firm, and this is where all the this is how it makes sense that he ends up investing in Georgia. He just hires a guy to do it. That's Hensler Financial, mentioned in the previous story. Since Hannity started investing with his firm, Hensler Financial, as an Atlanta radio host in the 1990s, I guess he started in Georgia, so it makes even more sense, and it's less suspicious than originally thought. He has risen to stardom as a host of Fox News. He's built an image of himself as a blue jeans wearing regular guy willing to take on out-of-touch elites and hypocritical Learjet liberals. When you go shopping for clothes, don't you go to the discount rack? Lako asked Hannity. If I do go shopping, it's at Kmart, Walmart, and Target, my favorite stores, Hannity said, or Costco. And tends to look like it. But when it comes to shopping for real estate, Hannity has far more expensive tastes. Over the last decade, this is the high end of what he's been buying. Over the last decade, Hannity appears to have built a real estate empire worth tens of millions of dollars that spans at least 4 states and whose existence has remained hidden from the public behind anonymous shell corporations registered to the address of Hensler Financial, according to property records and corporate filings reviewed by the Times, the LA Times here. The companies all start with the same 4 letters, SPMK, followed by Roman numerals, and, along with high-end luxury properties, they also own rental properties that could house hundreds of tenants and which are currently taking new renters. SPMK owns an entire neighborhood of duplexes in Lithia Springs, Georgia, a whole neighborhood. And there's a map here, and you should see it. And it's like, yeah, that's literally a whole neighborhood. In Lithia Springs, Georgia, been a couple gun fails there. Apartment complexes in Athens, Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, Gainesville, Georgia, and Madison, Alabama. The first 3 all gun fail hotspots, too. High-rise condos in South Florida, like Donald Trump, and a private helicopter and private jet registered at an airport 20 miles from Hannity's mansion on Long Island. One of the companies, SPMK2, is a co-owner of Hensler Property Management, LLC. What do you like about that? So Hensler holds the contracts for SPMK, but SPMK2, anyway, is co-owner of Hensler. I mean, like that circle, which manages rental properties owned by other SPMK named limited liability corporations, according to financial disclosures from Hensler Financial. Lako is also listed as an investor, so of course when he comes on the show he should be talking about him as his business partner. SPMK2 also co-owns Hensler Capital LLC, an investment fund that recently launched a private securities offering that has raised $13 million from 65 investors between January 31st and February 15th, according to SEC disclosures. Lako, again, is listed as an investor in that. Now, did they go on to explain this? Because I did see elsewhere, SPMK are apparently the initials of his 4 kids. And like Donald Trump, who, owns things under the name of, DJT Soho Roman numeral 1 and DJT Soho Roman numeral 2, and so on and so forth. It's a very common way of divvying things up. And by the way, owning things through individual units or blocks of units under different LLCs is a fairly common thing to do, even for smaller investors who just want to, well, the reason that they're LLCs is they're trying to limit liability in the first place. And if you own different houses under different LLCs, then liability that you might incur from one property can't be exacted from the equity in another property because they're technically owned by separate entities, and you can't sue against all the rest of them. It's just good practice. The shell company's links to Hannity were first reported by The Guardian, as we mentioned, which said that many of the properties were bought after banks foreclosed on their previous owners after the Great Recession. Anyway, there's much more to the story here, but I just thought I would let you know that there's this weird relationship in which there's a lot of mutual back scratching going on between somebody who is supposed to be his personal financial advisor, but is also his business partner and also a frequent guest on his radio program. And of course, if they're raising, private equity funds, then having this guy on the radio show to pitch those funds would be of great personal financial interest to Sean Hannity, and I'm guessing he never bothered to disclose any of that. Anyhow, we can move on from the Sean Hannity thing. I think we are informed as we need to be up to date on that situation, and we can hang it up for the day and see if anything explodes while we're not looking. And, well, first of all, let's swing by over here and make sure we're also up to speed on other fronts. Then move on, as promised, to the story of Ronnie Jackson. I have a CBS News article here. Democrats reviewing allegations against VA nominee Ronnie Jackson. And remember, he spells his name Ronny. They didn't get that right in the initial press release from the Trump administration. They went with the more traditional Ronnie, but he's a Y, Jackson. The ranking Democrat on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee is reviewing allegations he's hearing about Ronnie Jackson, the White House physician and President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was unclear late Monday whether the Senate panel would postpone Jackson's confirmation hearing, which was scheduled for Wednesday, tomorrow, in light of stories about the nominee told by current or former White House medical staff. What kind of stories could there be? Sources familiar with the tale say Senator John Tester's committee staff is reviewing multiple allegations of a, quote, hostile work environment. And that could mean almost anything, but God help them if they turn out to be about sexual harassment, which, maybe, but maybe not. The accusations include excessive drinking on the job. And really, should there be any drinking on the job? I suppose, out for lunch or whatever, and you have a cocktail, which really at this stage of the game should be frowned upon during working lunches, but is instead winked at quite frequently still. But excessive drinking on the job. Wow. Improperly dispensing meds. Whew, that could be a death knell for any doctor. Well, that was said by one of the people familiar who was granted anonymity to speak frankly about the situation. The other people familiar with the stories also confirmed those details. If proven true, quote, it'll sink his nomination, said one of the sources. Maybe, unless, of course, he did this all on Fifth Avenue. Tester's office began hearing the allegations from current and former employees in the last several days and over the weekend, said one of the people familiar with the ongoing probe. And I don't know that there'd be a great deal of motivation out there for anybody to make up stories about him. I mean, every other official in the Trump administration is corrupt as hell. You don't really necessarily need to get the VA secretary designate on the hook if you don't really have anything. And he's not a ripe and juicy target necessarily either. So I don't know. I got some questions about this. And what, I mean, I have questions about whether there's any reason to believe or rather to disbelieve the stories. As of late Monday, it was unclear if the Veterans Committee planned to postpone Jackson's hearing. Some, though not all, of the 7 Democratic senators on the VA committee met Monday evening to discuss what to do about the allegations. Isaacson was out of town. He, of course, not a Democratic senator on the committee. And did they mention him earlier in the story? I don't think so, but we're talking about Johnny Isaacson of Georgia. For some reason, he's just Isaacson now. Isaacson was out of town delivering the eulogy at the funeral of his best friend. He is expected to return to Washington late Monday evening. Jackson was tapped to be VA secretary after President Trump fired former Secretary David Shulkin. The Iraq War veteran is best known for his January press conference in which he gave Mr. Trump a clean bill of health. And that's really all there is on or all I found anyway as of last night on the Jackson situation. And there's probably an update out there somewhere, but it's just kind of a bizarre set of accusations about somebody that you would think, one, you would hope is above reproach, and two, you really have very little reason to believe isn't above reproach. I mean, you're in one of the cushiest jobs going, and really there was no expectation of advancement from there except possibly, maybe you make him Surgeon General or something like that. But moving him to VA was very unexpected. And the other articles that cover his story are, of course, mostly about his, or rather, they mostly focus on the fact that he is rather less qualified for the job than most previous nominees. That is, he's got no major administrative experience, and the VA is an enormous bureaucracy. The latest from the Washington Post 3 hours ago is that the Senate did, in fact, move to postpone the confirmation hearing for Jackson. Until when, I don't know. Let's just take a quick look at the Washington Post writing on this one. Senate to postpone hearing for Jackson, White House officials told. Senate lawmakers have done that. Let's see, just sort of skimming to get the basic details without going through everything. I can tell you we're vetting out Jackson, said Senator John Tester of Montana, the committee's ranking Democrat. I can't get into specifics, but we're doing our job to make sure he's fit for the job, which of course he isn't. The committee's chair is Johnny Isaacson from Georgia. He declined to comment. Jerry Moran of Kansas, though, said he had raised concerns about Jackson's lack of management background when he talked to Chief of Staff John Kelly about the matter. This job is so difficult. Nothing about it is easy, and it takes a very unique person to be able to lead an organization that's so difficult to lead, and I need to be convinced that's the case regardless of his sense of his experience. The White House statement on it, was basically, well, he's a good guy, and he's been a physician to 3 presidents, Republican and Democrat, and praised by them all, although for some reason it says here prized by them all, but P-R-I-S-E-D. So I don't really know what that's supposed to mean. That's just somebody's typo, I'm sure. And, it's just the guy's there's nothing to point to say that's a guy who ought to be the head of the VA. At best, you could say maybe he would make a good Surgeon General, but that's it. But I don't know. There had to be some payoff for agreeing to say that the guy was 239 pounds, and maybe this is it. All right. We haven't spoken yet about the attack in Toronto, and that's because, of course, it happened in Toronto, about which most of us know next to nothing. Minus, of course, those of you living along the northern tier, I suppose, and those of you who are actual Canadians who know plenty about Toronto and resent the fact that we know nothing about Toronto. But, down here we have mass shootings every other day, and so an attack in Canada, it's in the papers, but it's not top of mind. But we'll take a look just to update things. And, of course, it doesn't involve guns, so it's not of interest to Americans, generally speaking, and it doesn't qualify as a gun story. But another of these, this continuing series of really frightening attacks because they are unpredictable and they can happen anywhere. And if there's anything scarier, I guess, at least in the abstract, than a random gun attack, which could happen at any time here in the United States, and might not happen all that frequently elsewhere, driving your van into a crowd, well, that can happen anywhere there's a crowd, and gun control laws aren't going to do too much about that. I'm going to take a look at USA Today for this because, yes, despite the fact that it is a Canadian story, I don't know, for some reason Google, I guess based on my location, is handing me USA Today, New York Daily News, which is never going to tell me anything about that, although they'll get into the salacious details of who was the attacker and what might his motivations have been. Here we go. Business Insider here's one from Canada. CBC, they actually managed to include this, although, let's see, we'll take a look. The CBC has a piece of what do we know about the attacker, basically. And there, local source, Toronto Star, suspected van driver. Yeah, everybody in Toronto wants to know what's up with this guy. The USA Today approach is, after Toronto van attack, Canadians mourn and ask simple question, why? But Canadians have different questions, or at least their newspapers think they ought to be asking different questions. Suspected van driver Alec Minassian due in court Tuesday morning. The Richmond Hills man, 25, stands accused of jumping the sidewalk with a rented van and ramming pedestrians along a 2.2-kilometer stretch of Yonge Street. And I don't know. Let's dive in and see if we can figure this thing out. I guess the president of the United States hasn't made any angry tweets about it because I guess the guy wasn't immediately connected to ISIS or didn't have a name that was easily connected, even fakely, to ISIS. Although, he's probably in there ketchuping his steak and asking, what kind of name is Minassian anyway? Is that foreign? What is that? Well, he's Canadian, so he's foreign, period. But okay. Anyway, let's see. 10 people killed in the attack. 15 others remain in the hospital. The suspect behind the wheel of the van later ditched the vehicle and got into a standoff with police officers. A police officer, a single one, on Poyntz Avenue, south of Shepherd Avenue. The very local angle on this. Eyewitness video of the confrontation shows him asking the officer to shoot me in the head, claiming he has a gun in his pocket. The officer arrested the suspect at the scene. The arresting officer, widely praised for his handling of the situation. Constable Ken Lamb, the Star has confirmed. Let's see. Later Monday, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said Minassian's name, not the ethnicity of his name, but his actual records attached to his name, did not trigger any red flags relating to terrorism. Goodale has described the incident as a horrific attack in an afternoon tweet offering praise to the Toronto police and condolences to the victims and families. By nightfall, he had tempered his language. This incident that happened here on the street behind us was horrendous, but it does not appear to be connected in any way to national security. Though the police chief there said it definitely looked deliberate. So, keeping one eye on that, and I suppose I guess the president could at any point just decide to be totally irresponsible and start calling it terrorism and, fantasizing from that point. All right. Let's see. I guess I'll note, at least for the record, George H.W. Bush apparently hospitalized as well following the funeral of Barbara Bush. I did see some interesting video of him shaking hands with everybody who had come to pay respects at the Barbara Bush viewing, and I wondered about that. I mean, he's 93 years old. He's in a wheelchair. Like, is that super healthy for him to be doing? It was very, dignified of him to want to greet everyone who had turned out, but probably not the healthiest thing to do. And now he's in the hospital with an infection, and that seems rather sad. So, okay, we'll keep one eye on that. And at his advanced age, and he's a little bit frail in his mid-90s, that could be the end for George H.W. Bush, but hoping that they do well by him in the hospital, at the very least, and can clear things up for him. All right. I don't really care to stand around and do very much cheerleading about that, but we wish you the best of routine American healthcare, because it's the best system in the world, and you didn't want to improve it for anybody else, so good luck with it. We'll move on from there. Okay, let's see. Oh, I see that I've got not quite at the ready. I have 2 listener submissions here that I can share with you, and now looking at the clock, I see, well, maybe we'll throw us we'll do one for today because the other came in much later, and I'll have to download and prepare that one. But Lisa Iannucci, are you listening? Hi, Lisa. She has sent us a report from on the ground in, is this where you live, in New Jersey's 4th District, Lisa? And I got a chance to preview it last night and got it ready with a little light editing for the morning. Don't worry about it. Nobody has to do any light editing. If it needs to be done, and I think so, I'll take care of it. So long as your segment isn't an hour long, I'd be able to take care of that. And but her view of what's going on in New Jersey's 4th district, in particular in the Democratic primary there, and really some commentary on the way primary elections work in both parties in New Jersey, which you're probably already imagining doesn't sound really good when you say it out loud. So we'll bring you Lisa's contribution after the break, and I see you got a couple more here that I'll hold for another day, perhaps later in the week. All right, other stories worth mentioning. I'd say this one, and it's from David K. Johnston, and longtime listeners to the show know that I like to read David K. Johnston articles out loud, but David objects very frequently. No, has objected once that I know of, possibly very frequently in other situations, to the way I read the articles and add my own commentary along with it, because if you're not listening closely, or even if you are listening closely and I am not paying close attention, I don't differentiate clearly enough between when I'm reading the author's words and adding my own. And I say he took offense to this once, largely because I think we used his name in promoting the show that day and said, I'm reading David K. Johnston's article about XYZ. And that went out in a tweet, and he saw that on Twitter, and he said, I'll listen to the podcast. And then he was furious, not really, but he was perturbed with the way we did that. And so I resolved from then on that when I read a David K. Johnston piece, it would be obvious when I was reading his words, because I would read them in a high-pitched falsetto voice that I thought was good for gentle ribbing, but then I realized David K. Johnston probably wasn't really listening to the show unless we put his name in the tweet. So maybe we'll try that trick again. But this is a what do we got here? The review of has he got a book out? Is that what I'm looking at? It's in Salon, and it looks like the piece is written by Chauncey DeVega. Is Chauncey still writing at Daily Kos? I mean, people switch teams so frequently that, it's certainly possible to be writing at both. But he's got this piece here. Pulitzer-winning reporter David K. Johnston saying, the evidence suggests Trump is a traitor. And can I say that again? Trump is a traitor. I, of course, agree and believe that to be true, and will comb through why David K. Johnston believes that to be the case as well. Look at this. Chauncey writes, the saga of President Donald Trump consists of several parallel and intersecting stories. There is the structural dimension. Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton was not entirely unpredictable or shocking. America's crisis in civic literacy, political polarization, rampant anti-intellectualism, deeply embedded sexism and racism, greed, broken schools, and weakened democratic institutions, as well as a hollowed-out public sphere where people confuse celebrity with human worth, go Chauncey, made the election of someone like Trump nearly inevitable. I guess there's some truth to that. There is Donald Trump, the man, who seems to revel in the very worst human values. True. His closest family members, including his father and grandfather, taught him the value of unrepentant greed and ambition. He also displays the symptoms of malignant narcissism as well as sociopathy. In all, Trump is a master of manipulation who leads a political cult. How do those factors combine to form Donald Trump's presidency and the type of society he and the Republican Party want to create? Are matters actually worse than they appear in terms of how we assess the political and social crisis of Trump's presidency? What strategy should Democrats use to stop Trump and the Republican Party? If Trump is removed from office because of his increasingly obvious efforts to obstruct justice, how will his public respond? Will there be violence? In an effort to answer these questions, I recently spoke with Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter David K. Johnston. For 30 years, Johnston has covered Trump's life and career as detailed in the best-selling book, The Making of Donald Trump. His new book is It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. And, hint, it involves a colon. I'm not kidding. Anyway, this is not only a sort of a dive into his book, but a straight-up interview. Oh, and by the way, you can hear the entire conversation on Chauncey's podcast, which is available over at salon.com, and you'll find a link to this article in today's summary. Let's start with this we got this after the break, and we'll try and make sure we have room for this and for Lisa's contribution in between the top of the hour break and the bottom of the hour break. First of which is coming up in just a minute, and so we'll just let's just stand here and wait for things to develop. No, okay, we're going to read the first exchange between Chauncey and David and leave it at that for before the break. How was Donald Trump able to defeat Hillary Clinton and win the White House? The answer is, of course, black magic, but David says differently. Well, a series of events came together. Okay, I'm just kidding, but I mean, yeah. First of all, Hillary Clinton had a lot of baggage, and as Donna Brazil's book Hacks shows, she ran a poor campaign and did not listen to the advice of people who told her she needed to pay attention to what Trump was doing. Okay, so we'll definitely have lots of people who have disagreement with that, and lots of people who are listening to the show who would say, yeah, that's absolutely true. But, all right, I wasn't sure where David K. Johnston would be on this one. Secondly, the Republican challengers were a clown car of utterly unqualified people, which meant his lack of qualifications was not so noticeable. One unqualified candidate in that field was John Kasich. Of course, he didn't get anywhere. And then it goes on from there, but let's, like I said, take a short break at the top of the hour, continue with this afterwards, and more. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. See, I told you just a short break here, and let's see, trying to catch up with comments that have come in during the show as well. And a little too late for me to point out, as Michael Musson suggests, that the penis transplant video is an auto-playing video, apparently, at least on his browser. I don't know if that was the case for me or not, but I played it intentionally, so I have no excuse. However, you know, as he says, they should post this on the NRA front page, and maybe gun fail might lead to an upgrade. Well, that could happen. Maybe people are viewing this as a ticket to something bigger and better, as they might put it. The Warlock asking the question, by the way, with regard to Hannity, do I expect Republicans to start distancing themselves from Hannity? No, not yet. I think they're going to have to develop a much more damning case against him for that to happen. And even if they were to connect him to some kind of fraud, I don't know if it's central enough to his brand that they'll be distancing themselves from him. There has to be some pretty hardcore criminal activity for them to care about anything, and even then, I don't know. I don't think this is the end of Hannity. However, there could be this danger that if he is as much of a Trump fanboy as he appears to be, the Cohen thing may not be the end of the coincidental overlap and relationship between the two. And then perhaps you might see some taint spread from Trump over to Hannity, and people begin to distance themselves. Karen has this, Karen D and Karen, or Kare, SF, Karesf, as you know from being a longtime listener to the show, had this comment suggesting a Saturday Night Live skit in which Ronnie Jackson allowed a final press conference as a goodbye after his nomination is withdrawn, and he's fired as White House doctor. He's drunk and tells the truth about Trump's physical condition, including a string of synonyms for obese and bald. It's already in the writer's room, I would think, Karen. Especially if this gets any bigger in the story here. Canadian Pundit. Thank you. Canuck Pundit Brian weighing in about the story in Toronto and letting us know. And in case you hadn't noticed, yes, very true. You have to admit, policing is done very differently in Canada than in the USA. The restraint that the officer used in Toronto is part of their training and clearly successful. No one was shot with a gun, even while the suspect baited the cop to shoot by, like, it says here he fake drew with a cell phone to see if he could entice the cop to shoot. And great restraint in that. Our American police are capable of such restraint. You just have to be white enough to warrant it, I guess. That's who gets treated with restraint here in the U.S. Anyway, let's see if we can get to at least a little bit more of the David K. Johnston interview with Chauncey DeVega and then share Lisa's piece here. We left off in the middle of his answer to how was Trump able to defeat Clinton and win the White House. He starts off right off the bat by saying Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate and did a terrible job running her race. And that is a matter of some terrific difference of opinion, shall we say, between, Hillary fans or, the occasional objective observer who says, there's some serious headwinds you're sailing into if Donald Trump is, say, colluding with the second largest major power in the world to manipulate your election. Next, though, he says, Donald ran on an economic platform that on the surface spoke to inequality and frustration. This, I think, too, a common viewpoint among, typically among the Bernie Sanders faction. This, too, very much disputed of late, particularly by Armando and even Greg, very clear on coming around to the notion that economic anxiety was all too often, if not always, simply a euphemism for people's racism. But they felt more comfortable at first blaming it on economic anxiety, but then later found that the permission structure was there to simply just be openly racist as well. So he says, next, Donald ran on an economic platform that on the surface spoke to inequality and frustration. For example, in 2012, the bottom 90% of Americans reported a smaller income than in 1967. Donald tapped into that problem by stealing that income from them, I would argue. But that's not what David says. But he's a con artist who promised to drain the swamp and then stocked it with swamp monsters. Another factor, he says, was the utter failure of journalists to vet Donald Trump. You can read about Barack Obama's kindergarten playmates in Indonesia by name, the boys he smoked dope with in high school by name, and some of the women he dated in college by name. But the New York Times, in the 16 months from Trump's campaign announcement to Election Day, had exactly 4 references that had Trump and mafia in the same story, and they were all in passing and inconsequential. They didn't report on the 2 income tax fraud trials that Trump lost. There was just a lot of stuff about Trump that was never reported because his campaign was like looking at a car crash on the other side of the highway, but it had dancing girls and a marching band, so you couldn't turn away from it. For 40 years, the Republicans have done serious work preparing for the day when, as a minority party, they wanted to still be in control. So they have reduced the franchise. They passed laws like this horrible law in Michigan that lets you throw out ballots on the most bogus grounds, entire precincts. All that combined to help Trump win the Electoral College. Next question. Why were so many journalists and pundits unable to understand the true power of Trump's campaign? So much of what he did and continues to do is political performance art drawn from professional wrestling and reality TV. It isn't complicated. That was actually a question. And the answer to which is, remember that campaign reporters cover the horse race. They focus on the sizzle and not the steak. Everybody was so taken by his unusual campaign that they just forgot about the basics. Next question. You have studied and written about Donald Trump for 3 decades. What does the public need to know about his background to understand his behavior as president? All right, great. Here are the key things people should know about Donald Trump. He comes from a family of criminals. His grandfather made his fortune running whorehouses in Seattle and the Yukon Territory. His father, Fred, had a business partner named Willie Tomasello, who was an associate of the Gambino crime family. Trump's father was also investigated by the U.S. Senate for ripping off the government for what would have been the equivalent of $36 million in today's money. Donald got his showmanship from his dad, as well as his comfort with organized criminals. I think it's very important for religious Americans to know that Donald Trump says that his personal philosophy of life is revenge. He has called anyone who turns the other cheek, which is a fundamental teaching of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, a fool, an idiot, or a schmuck. Trump is a man who says things that are absolutely contrary to the teachings of the New Testament. He also denigrates Christians, yet you see all these ministers endorsing him. I've followed Donald for 30 years. I don't see any evidence that he's changed, and he certainly hasn't repented, which is a fundamental Christian obligation. He's a racist through and through. He's been found in formal judicial proceedings to discriminate against non-whites in rentals and employment. It's important to understand that Trump is aggressively anti-Christian, despite claiming to be one. He is bluntly racist, and more importantly, he is literally ignorant about almost everything. Those are bad things to be. Trump's voters, next question, Trump's voters will not abandon him under any circumstances. He leads the Republican Party and thus has its news media and other resources at his disposal. Some folks believe that there will be a blue wave of Democratic votes that will wash him and the Republican Party out to sea in 2018 and 2020. Chauncey says, I don't see that happening. I think Trump wins in 2020. Am I being too cynical? Answer. Well, he may win again in 2020. The November elections are the most important American elections since the Civil War, and I'm including 1932. Based just on normal historic averages, the Republicans should lose control of the House by about 4 seats. They should lose control of the Senate as well, although the map is pretty awful for the Democrats. If Republicans retain control, then I believe what will happen over time is that someone who shares Trump's dictatorial and authoritarian tendencies but doesn't have his baggage, someone who's a competent manager and just as charismatic, will eventually arise and you can kiss your individual liberties goodbye. That will take time, but it's the trend we are heading towards. On the other hand, if enough people go to the polls, remember, roughly 100 million people did not vote in 2016. If the Democrats get organized, if they can persuade the public they have an agenda that goes beyond just getting rid of Trump, and they get control of Congress, they will move to impeach him. They need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict him, but they will certainly move to have public hearings. All right. Next question. Is Trump an ideologue? Answer, no. That's the whole point of the first chapter of my book, President Like No Other. That would be the chapter, not the book. The 44 previous presidents were all over the map. They were smart people and dumb people. There were people of impeccable integrity, such as Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter, and there were absolute scoundrels like Warren Harding. We had a murderous racist in the White House whose painting hangs in the Oval Office, now looking down on Trump. What distinguishes all those presidents, particularly Chester Arthur, the one closest to Trump, is that they tried in the context of their times to make America better. Donald Trump is a man with this desperate need for adoration. He's an empty vessel. The exact opposite of Henry David Thoreau, a life unexamined. His only philosophy is the glorification of Donald. Next question. If you were going to consult with the Democratic Party about how to defeat Trump and the Republican Party, what would you suggest? I think most of what Hillary said came across as blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of blahs in here. I don't know how many blahs exactly, but I'm going to give you the flavor just by saying blah, 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 blah. What I would say to the Democrats is your first and fundamental mission is to tell people what you are for. I have my disagreements with this even, believe it or not. Not that you're against Trump. Being against Trump doesn't get you very far. It will get you some people who hate Trump. But what are you for? What you want to say is we will get the incredible burden of health care off the back of small businesses. We will make it so you don't have to stick with an employer because you have health care and you don't want to run the risk of switching or losing it. We want to relieve businesses of the burden of health care like every other modern country, and it will save everyone money. I personally think, though true, that's a bit of a snoozer of a message, but okay. We want to invest in the future of America, so we will put more money into education and basic science. Did you know that half the economic growth in this country since the end of World War II can be traced to taxpayer investments in science? We want investments at home that will create jobs. Our country is falling apart in front of our eyes. All of this is very interesting, but I'm actually going to skip the rest of the question. You either have the same or a slightly different version of what Democrats need to do in your own mind, and why get you into a fight with an interview that I'm reading aloud. What do you think will happen with the Mueller investigation? That's more interesting. Trump is not acting like an innocent person. Answer, well, Mueller has assembled an extraordinarily talented team. Here is what Mueller is going to find. Mueller has the Trump tax returns. A competent prosecutor would have them by now. The Trump tax returns are the beginning point. You've got to get the books and records. Donald has a long history of hiding books and records when they're sought by auditors. As for the Russians, it is beyond dispute at this point that the Trump campaign was actively involved in a conspiracy. He's not exactly what Putin wanted, but most importantly, Trump's not Hillary Clinton, who would have gone up to the edge of war to make Putin give up Crimea. So in other words, it was enough for Trump to be not Hillary Clinton, but whatever. That's in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, not American voters. She made that very clear in a campaign. He would be in severe pain if he didn't give up the Crimean Peninsula in eastern Ukraine, so he didn't want her under any circumstances. Mueller is going to report on tax fraud. He's going to report on the Russians, and he is going to show that the Trump campaign was knowingly being helped by the Russians. Remember that the Australian, Dutch, and British intelligence agencies, and maybe others, went to the FBI, State Department, and other contacts and said, you folks have a problem. Where exactly Mueller will go beyond that, I don't know. His mission is the Russians, and the Russians are tied in with the tax returns. But remember this. The job of a prosecutor is not to bring the perfect case. It's not to bring the case that should be brought for political reasons. It's to bring the easiest, most solid case that wins. Mueller will do that. There is nothing that prevents indicting a sitting president, but it is an untested issue. Mueller is going to have to decide whether to indict him or to go to Congress. If the overwhelming conclusion of the Mueller report is that the Russians put Trump in the White House, then you face a second terrible problem. What do you do about Mike Pence, who is also the beneficiary of Russian interference? If the Congress impeaches and removes Trump and Pence, it will only be because the Democrats control Congress. So unless something else changes, we get President Nancy Pelosi. You can just imagine the people who will be in the streets screaming coup d'etat if she's president. I think the only way to address that is for her or whoever is speaker to announce they will be a caretaker president who is not going to do anything extreme. I don't know if that takes care of anything, but I get your point. There is no good ending to the story. America will survive this. We'll get past it. But whenever Trump leaves, there's no good ending. If Trump is removed by impeachment or by the voters, whether in a Republican primary or in a general election, I know what he will do. He's already told us what he'll do by his actions. Trump will spend the rest of his days fomenting violence and revolution in this country. He's careful not to directly say revolution, but he will call the government illegitimate. He might even call it criminal, since he called Democrats who didn't stand up during his State of the Union speech treasonous. If they're going to impeach Trump, I believe they have to have a plan to indict, try, convict, and imprison him. But Trump will be a role model for some people, and there may well be violence over it. As Malcolm Nance and others have warned, Russia's interference in the 2016 election and likely infiltration of Trump's inner circle could be one of the worst intelligence disasters in American history, a failure of Benedict Arnold or Rosenberg proportions. Let me be very clear, he answers, and quotable about this. We'll see. Ready? At an absolute minimum, Donald Trump has divided loyalties, and the evidence we already have suggests that Donald Trump is a traitor. In fact, I would say the evidence we already have, the public materials such as emails, for example, strongly indicate that Donald Trump is a traitor. However, I don't even think he understands what he's done.
What the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
That's a good question. And unfortunately, that is the end of the printed version of the interview. And of course, I remind you, you can find a longer version of it and hear David K. Johnston's amazing falsetto voice, which he doesn't actually have, on Chauncey's podcast, which is available through a link to this Salon piece. The payoff was really at the bottom there. And quite honestly, we probably could have gotten to that without inflaming the passions of the 2016 Democratic Party primary campaign. But I don't know. I thought that there might be something else worth mining out of that. And it's always worth reading through those materials and seeing if they lead you onto any interesting tangents. Okay, we have got the time now to roll Lisa Iannucci's piece here. I'm just trying to think. Did she say, yeah, Ian? Did I say Iannucci, like Italian Iannucci? It's Iannucci. She pronounces it herself, right in the piece. 7.5 minutes or so on what's going on in New Jersey 4th District. I have not been watching this race, and now I'll take a peek. But this is interesting, if for no other reason than just learning about the way primaries or nominating for most congressional seats apparently actually happens on the ground in practice in New Jersey. It doesn't surprise me terribly. I'm originally from New Jersey. My father did get involved a little bit in local Democratic politics there and spent some time on the township and county Democratic committees, largely because, in getting involved in a local political question, he found, one, some great dissatisfaction with the local officials who were dealing with the problem, and two, that he learned very quickly the lesson, and I guess that lesson then imparted to me very quickly, that very often when you run into the problem of officialdom that you think is either, if not outright corrupt, then certainly unsympathetic to the way you approach things, and so you realize if you actually get involved, you can become those officials and do a much better job. But of course, it presents a very weird conundrum / paradox. I did take a listen to Lisa's piece last night, and I guess we'll comment on it either along the way or afterwards. There's in many cases, no good way of handling these questions. Let me just roll Lisa's tape here, and you'll see what I mean. I think you'll hear the issues coming as they come up, and we'll discuss them afterwards. All right, let's take it away, Lisa.
Hi, David.
Hi.
It's Lisa Iannucci from the wilds of central New Jersey,
See?
a state that has quite the reputation as a hotbed of political corruption, and rightfully so. There's a long-standing tradition of cronyism, payoffs, fraud, racketeering. The list goes on and on. Party loyalty is paramount, and party bosses run their state fiefdoms with an iron fist. What they say goes. The most recent example of this, of course, is the resurrection of Senator Robert Menendez, who, despite federal corruption charges, is 2018's duly anointed Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate, thanks to his position as one of the chieftains of the political machine of North Jersey. So, it's kind of unusual when a person with no ties to the political machine of either party rises to become a credible candidate for higher office. But in 2018, Jim Keedy, a lifelong social justice activist and former professional soccer goalie, is a legitimate contender for Congress from New Jersey's 4th District. In a year when just about anything is possible, the usually insurmountable polling margin of long-term Republican Christopher H. Smith in this district, normally 15-plus points, has been cut in half. And just like everywhere else in the country, Democrats are smelling blood in the water. But that's not why he chose to run. Keedy has been toying with running for this seat since 2015, when the odds against any Democrat picking off Smith were far greater. No, Jim Keedy chose to run against Chris Smith not to take advantage of the fabled blue wave of 2018, but to rid the House of one of its worst threats to women's reproductive rights, and more importantly, to rebuild the Democratic Party, to move it in a more progressive direction, and to do this from the ground up throughout the district, and eventually the state. Political power in the Garden State is still very much a local affair. It's in the hands of the town councils, mayors, and freeholders that administer the state's 565 municipalities. In New Jersey, school districts and public services are allocated not by county, but by municipal district. There are no county schools, no county police. Instead, most towns each employ their own public works services, teachers and policemen, firemen, etc. If you want to know why it's so expensive to live here, there's part of your answer. And local politics in New Jersey is as machine-driven as it gets. It's inscrutable and Byzantine, and it affords great power to people who are rarely held accountable. For example, if you're running for Congress and you have a contested primary, you actually get party endorsement as the chosen candidate before the actual primary. In an unbelievably partisan and obtuse system that literally permits county party chairs to make up rules as they go along, candidates typically receive party imprimatur and a coveted party line slot on the primary ballot by virtue of a poll of party delegates in attendance at each county's convention, which happens before the primary. Attendance at party conventions as a delegate is typically based on service to the party in township committees, councils, etc. But even this arcane process varies from county to county. In Monmouth County, for example, which forms the bulk of District 4, the county Democratic chair actually chooses a percentage of delegates as the folks who are actually privileged to vote for the preferred candidate at the convention. Yep, that's right. The party bosses actually choose who will vote, which, it goes without saying, lends itself to manipulation of results. If you know how a particular delegate may vote and you choose only delegates that you know will vote a certain way to be the voting delegates, well, that gives you a pretty good idea of the outcome of the process. And so the party has its chosen candidate, the person who gets preferential ballot treatment, and the voting public is never the wiser. They actually think they're choosing the Democratic contender when they vote in the primary, when in reality nothing could be further from the truth. Oh, sure, there's an election in early June, and they do get to vote, but it's largely irrelevant, not only because the party powers that be force all Democrats at the state and national level to fall in line behind this pre-selected candidate immediately after the convention, but because people tend to vote down the party line, down the ballot, in a straight line. And this line is where the preferred candidate appears. Voters may not even realize that the Democrat in the preferred spot on the ballot has an opponent who is also a Democrat, and that this person might actually be a more suitable choice for the district. Indeed, in this particular case, when Representative Smith has been in office for 37 years, that's right, 37 years, and he has, for all intents and purposes, run opposed most of this time, they may not even realize there's a real live primary battle going on. You see, for most of Chris Smith's time in office, the Dems have pretty much conceded the seat to the Republican Party, waiting until the last minute to put someone up for election every 2 years and offering little to no party support. So this spring, it's coming as a shock to primary voters when canvassers come to their doors to talk about a contested Democratic primary in the 4th District. After all, they may not have been of voting age the last time it actually happened. Yep, the deck's stacked against local boy Jim Keedy despite his years of activism, public service, and community engagement. The Democratic Party, as it has done in a number of other races across the country, has handpicked a veteran to run. In this case, it's the local party that's on it, not the DCCC. And their excuse is that the 4th District, which they see as moderate to conservative, needs a moderate candidate. The New Jersey Dems see the district, which is loaded with retirees and veterans, as a place where this type of candidate will be attractive. But the 4th District has historically suffered from low Democratic turnout because of the weakness of the candidates that the party has put forth, who, given Smith's strength among the national right-to-life community, they've often barely bothered to field contenders. An average of about 76,000 registered Democrats simply don't vote at all. And another 100,000 or so voters don't even bother to declare a party affiliation, let alone vote. And it's changing demographically as more folks from the northern, more urban areas of the state move southward in search of less congestion and a cheaper cost of living. And District 4 lies just south of fast-rising Asbury Park, the internationally famous music and arts mecca and home to a vibrant LGBTQ community. The once desolate seaside resort has of late seen significant numbers of residents shifting southward into the 4th District. It doesn't seem likely that these voters will be engaged at all by a milquetoast Democrat with ties to the defense industry, no political experience, and next to no name recognition in the district he hopes to represent. There's far more to this story than space or time permits, but I think I've given you the basic flavor of this race. It's a classic David and Goliath tale, one that seems to be playing itself out in similar races across the country in 2018. The Democratic Party in general, and the DCCC in particular, have seen fit to insert themselves into congressional races about which they seem to know next to nothing. Why it's the party's business to foist congressional candidates on districts about which they don't know much is questionable in any election year. Why they have seen fit to do this in a year when our very democracy is at stake, in which every single seat is of vital interest, is almost beyond comprehension. But Jim Keedy is a fighter, and like Laura Moser in Texas' 7th District, he's not going down without a fight. Stay tuned to the congressional race in New Jersey's 4th District. It's apt to be quite a doozy.
Thanks again, Lisa. And yeah, we should pay attention, of course, we should pay attention to all of our races, but thanks for calling this one out in particular. I am not familiar with what's going on there yet. It's still a little early, of course, but primary elections are the time to intervene so that things go your way. There were a lot of issues raised in there, including, the Menendez issue, but definitely wanted to return to this after the break, so I want to prepare you for that and comment a little bit and just illustrate, once again, one of the problems that arises all the time when you're trying to get things to go your way. There's a lot of ways to get tripped up intentionally, and, we'll address those next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's just one distraction here that I have to note came up during the break. NRA backers are blowing stuff up again. They are angry because yet another company has decided to cut ties of whatever nature, I do not know, with the NRA, and so therefore everybody needs to trigger the libs by blowing up the expensive item in question. NRA backers now blowing up Yeti coolers after the NRA announces that the company is cutting ties. And so they have gotten 2 young women models to come out and dress in tight pants and fire rifles into a Yeti cooler filled with tannerite. And I'm so moved. I don't even know what to say. I'm so triggered by this. Please don't blow up your homes, houses, cars, cell phones, computers, children or other heirs and beneficiaries to trigger me anymore. I just don't know what I would do if you burned your house to the ground in protest. I would almost assuredly, though, end up supporting the Second Amendment. So you might give it a try. It's a calculated political risk. Go for it, I guess, because I believe in freedom. But I caution you, please. Well, don't do it next to me. NRA supporters are blowing up Yeti coolers, and those things cost like $400, by the way, and I don't know why. And other products and posting videos of their destruction online to protest the company's decision to cut ties with the gun group. By the way, I mean, do you think Yeti sheds a tear for this? You paid for the cooler. I mean, we've been through this, guys. Last time you were smashing Keurig machines. And I don't know. I mean, did the stock in Keurig, what stock does Yeti have? Do they have stock? Are they owned by a company that I can buy into? People are buying $400 coolers and blowing them up. What effing difference does that make to me? What do I care? It's income, as far as I'm concerned. Plus, I should buy stock in tannerite, but whatever. We should see if they can get that off the market. Yeti says it remains a supporter of the Second Amendment and simply ended a group of outdated discounting problems, replacing them with alternatives. So that's how snowflakey these idiots are. Instead of a 40% discount on Yeti coolers, you're going to get a 30% discount on Yeti coolers. What? Blow it up. Everyone knows God granted me the right to this cooler. I don't even know what this is supposed to be. The video shows irritated NRA supporters blowing up, shooting, or otherwise destroying Yeti coolers and tumblers in response to a report that Yeti... what is this? And it says in response to a report that from the NRA, Institute of Legislative Action. I don't know. Yeti is what? Yeti is withdrawing from the NRA Institute for Legislative Action, was ending its affiliation with the NRA, according to the Washington Post. I guess I better read the Washington Post story to figure out what the F is going on, because The Hill has no copy editors. Yes, they're blowing it up. Yeti says it's all a big mistake, but F it, Yeti, you should fan these flames. It's worth money to you. Yeti coolers are the hottest coolers around, and they're also wildly expensive, between $250 and $1,300, by the way, depending on the size. $1,300 cooler, good luck to you. I don't know. Maybe the guy I saw an unusual car in the parking lot the other day. I knew I would eventually get to this stupid story. I saw a Bentley SUV. I did not know they made it. I don't know what it's called. It looked like a Lexus, so buy a Lexus. It looked like a Lexus. I'm sure it's nicer inside. I looked it up. My kids were fascinated by it. I think the MSRP on this thing is $229,000. It's a mid-size crossover style SUV thing, and it looked, for all intents and purposes, it looked externally like a Lexus, minus the big grill. But there you have it. So I guess maybe there will be a $1,300 cooler in the back of a $229,000 crossover SUV. And I guess probably a gun, too. Leave the guy alone. Anyway, so let's see. A discount on a Yeti, like the company offered to NRA and other organizations, is no small thing, I guess. Just get a cheaper cooler. Get a styrofoam cooler. They blow up better, cheaper, whatever. Anyway, still, the price of the coolers didn't stop some Yeti owners from blowing them up in ritual anger after the National Rifle Association claimed that Yeti was terminating the discount as part of an NRA boycott. On Monday afternoon, and they should, apparently Yeti says that wasn't the case, but it should be now. I would just say, F it, go for it. You're already getting the bad press / good press. Go and do it. On Monday afternoon, for example, Brian Atkinson unloaded a Yeti cooler from the bed of a truck. Whatever. He blew it up, all right? What else do you need to know about this? If Yeti can't stand behind the NRA, I ain't standing behind Yeti no more. Atkinson told, this is the guy who shot his thing, Brian Atkinson, told his camera during a Facebook Live video, which is shared more than 2,300 times. This is really Tea Party-esque in the coverage here. I mean, 5 people on a corner saying taxed enough already. Hours and hours of coverage as a phenomenon sweeping the country. 2,300 people watched him blow up a Yeti cooler. Why? Mad at Yeti? Maybe. Or just blowing stuff up is cool? Yeah, probably about 2,000 of that 2,300. Let's see. The stunt followed a letter to NRA members sent by the NRA Institute for Legislative Action announcing that Yeti had severed ties with the NRA Foundation, following the lead of other companies in the wake of the February 14th Parkland, Florida shooting massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The letter, sent by former NRA president and current lobbyist Marion P. Hammer, said the company, quote, declined to do business with the NRA Foundation without prior notice and refused to say why. They will only say that they no longer sell products to the NRA Foundation, Hammer wrote. That certainly isn't sportsmanlike. In fact, Yeti should be ashamed. About what? But on Monday, just as the backlash and calls for boycott picked up steam, Yeti said in a statement to the Washington Post, also posted on Yeti's Facebook account, that the NRA letter was inaccurate. The Austin-based retailer said it notified various organizations, including the NRA Foundation, that it was eliminating, quote, a group of outdated discounting programs from which the organizations benefited. The NRA was not specifically targeted, Yeti said. When we notified the NRA Foundation, they were the only ones that cried like babies and had their people blow our stuff up, but we don't care so long as they pay full price for it. I mean, it's basically what this should be. When we notified the NRA Foundation and the other organizations of this change, Yeti explained that we were offering them an alternative customization program broadly available to consumers and organizations, including the NRA Foundation. These facts directly contradict the inaccurate statement the NRA ILA distributed on April 20th. Further, the statement continued, the NRA ILA stated that Yeti has declined to continue helping America's young people enjoy outdoor recreational activities. I should just add some emotion to this, I think. Nothing is further from the truth. Yeti was founded more than 10 years ago. Dun, dun, dun. Who cares? All right, whatever. Yeti was founded more than 10 years ago with a passion for the outdoors, and over the course of the history, we have actively and enthusiastically supported hunters, anglers, and the broader outdoor community. Yay. Yeti is unwavering in our belief in and commitment to the constitutions of the United States of America and its Second Amendment. Who cares what my cooler company has to say about that? But okay, fine. Doesn't matter because the damage had already been done, and NRA supporters had taken to destroying Yeti coolers in a variety of explosive ways. Some filled the cooler with tannerite explosive rifle targets and, like Atkinson, shot it and blew it up in a field. Others shot holes through the stainless steel Yeti tumblers in their backyard or basements. One man crushed a Yeti tumbler in a vise. Arrgh! It makes me want to go lift, I can tell you that. Over the past decade, Yeti has risen to become an aspirational brand for hunters and outdoorsy consumers, as Ad Age described in a 2014 article about Yeti's distinct appeal to that market. Yeti is reinventing the utilitarian cooler as a status symbol, Ad Age wrote. The company calls the coolers grizzly-proof, as certified by the interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. Did you know there was one of those? It's made up of grizzly bears, which is amazing. Yeti markets them as ideal companions for campers and other outdoor adventurers trudging through the wilderness on trips that require storing food and drinks. They are, in fact, ideal companions for campers who are car camping. I mean, you don't want to trudge through the wilderness with one of those. They're heavy. They're bulky. They're good. They keep things cold. If you're camping out, terrific. I have not been able to afford one of those, but I'm also not out in the field for all that long. Maybe they're great for outdoorsmen. Maybe they're not. I don't know. Camping out doesn't usually require that many guns, but we do hear the stories from time to time of people accidentally shooting themselves or their friends and companions, particularly those who sleep with guns under their pillows for fear of noises in the forest. And that's what camping out is all about, by the way. Camping out in a forest where there's noises. And I don't know, we just saw the other day, I retweeted a story of a gun fail, a guy who shot and killed his friend that he was camping with because he unholstered a pistol because he heard noises outside, like my cousin Vinny did when he was sleeping in the cabin. Here's an owl and he goes and just shoots. He didn't shoot in this case. He didn't know what to shoot at. Couldn't see anything. It's dark. You're not going to be able to just shoot into the woods. And besides which, if you hear a noise in the woods, it could be another camper going to the bathroom, for all I know. Or not going to the bathroom, but, you know, doing those things that you would ordinarily do in a bathroom, but because you can't find it if you're at a campground, or there isn't one if you're not at a campground, you're out in the woods instead. So he was smart enough not to shoot into the woods, but reholstering his weapon, that's a different story. Reholstering his weapon, he accidentally shot and killed his friend. Happened the other day. I'll grab it. You know what? You could look it up. You Google it. I won't even give Scott the link to that. It doesn't matter. Yeti coolers. That's what really matters. So that's what's going on. It's good to keep them cold, and Yeti does that. You keep things cold. Yeti does that for you. So, therefore, guns and coolers. Even Hammer acknowledged at the start of the letter, for years, Yeti coolers has been a hot item for sportsmen at the Friends of NRA Foundation banquet and auction events around the country. In a statement emailed to the Washington Post Monday night, Hammer said that it was, quote, news to us that Yeti dropped not only the NRA Foundation from the discount program, but also other organizations. After 3 days, Yeti issued a statement claiming they didn't really drop the NRA Foundation. They claimed they simply eliminated the entire program affecting NRA Foundation and other unnamed organizations. Isn't that like eliminating a job position so you can get rid of an employee? I don't know. It's effing coolers, you a-hole. What's your problem? Besides which, isn't it like eliminating a job position to get rid of an employee? Let me guess. What do I think a lunatic gun lobbyist like Marion Hammer, who used to head up the Florida organization down there and is responsible for many of the worst Florida gun laws you ever heard of, what do I think she thinks about employers eliminating job positions so they can get rid of a particular employee? Probably cheerleads for it every chance she can get. She added that Yeti decided the NRA Foundation can't place any more orders, and in fact, they forced us to cancel orders they would not fill. A representative for Yeti did not immediately respond to the questions from the Post. Some NRA supporters commenting on Facebook were not buying Yeti's claim and said they would no longer buy Yeti products. I own several expensive Yeti products and planned on purchasing more. No, you didn't. However, not now, wrote one. You just lost my family's business. The Second Amendment is important. Yeti is not. Shame on you. Shame. You can feel it. One sensed the buying opportunity, however, writing, hey, proud NRA member here. Since I'm not a thin-skinned wussy who boycotts everything that upsets me in the least, if you are unhappy with Yeti and you want to destroy your cooler that is all of a sudden overpriced, I will gladly take it off your hands. Can't have too many of them, but you can't have too many O's, I guess, and that's why you went with the wrong spelling of two in that sentence. But congratulations to you, and your teachers. The Yeti flap comes after various businesses have distanced themselves from the NRA or from gun manufacturers in the aftermath of the Parkland shootings and every other one. Companies ranging from airlines to rental car companies ended discounts for NRA members. Retailers such as REI, Dick's Sporting Goods, and LL Bean announced new policies on gun sales and stopped selling certain weapons or products tied to gun manufacturers. All of these companies made formal announcements before making their stance on guns or the NRA clear. And that's the end of the story. They're sad about, oh, look at this. Here we go. Someone has put a Yeti tumbler in a garbage can, along with an empty tasty cake wrapper. So, probably part of a diet. I really like that thing, they say, but I like my NRA and my rights more. It says 910 Jen. Whoop-de frickin' do. I mean, really, honestly, that'll make the point for you. There's a tumbler in the garbage. What am I going to do? This is the dumbest thing I've heard of yet, but I just thought I would pause and say so because it's infuriatingly stupid. That also gets me out of going back and commenting on Lisa's piece, if I should choose to take that escape route, but I won't. I actually did want to discuss some of this and keep the discussion going. I know this is a big shift in gears, and I should have stuck to my topic earlier. I didn't realize just how dumb this thing was going to be. And so, I got carried away with it. But yes, what I found really interesting was the frustration, and it's a real frustration and a legitimate one, and I understand it and share it, that Lisa has with the way New Jersey runs, everything. And because it traditionally has, I don't know, maybe it's like a chicken and egg thing. Because it has such late primaries, it tends to afford its party structures the opportunity to do most of the nominating themselves because they're pretty low turnout affairs, June primaries in general. But like I said, it could be chicken and egg. They might be keeping their primaries in June so that interest in them remains low, so that people don't object very often or very strenuously to the parties guiding things with respect to nominations. But it does feel weird in the context of national primaries. Like, we have gotten used to the idea of very vigorous primary election campaigns for president and occasionally for Senate and even more rarely for the House. But as you get down further down the ticket, even for national offices, primaries are less a feature of the race than they are in presidential races. And we sometimes carry our feelings about primaries in presidential races over to these other races in other offices because they're just as important. I mean, it makes sense. It's not by any means an eccentric position to say, yeah, I want my candidates to be progressive across the board. And there's only one way to do that, and that's by being active in the primaries. There's nothing to argue with there. That is absolutely true. And I'm not even arguing with the rest of it. I guess I'm just pointing out, for instance, the irony of what we're usually in the business when it comes to primary elections in the Senate or House level. We're usually in the mode of complaining about the primary being steered by the DSCC, or more frequently the DCCC. And this was no exception here. The DCCC gets unfavorable mention in Lisa's piece. And all the things that bother her about the DCCC bother everybody eventually about the DCCC. And it's not just because the candidates don't go your way in one race or another. It's also largely because it rarely goes your way at all. And it's money that's driving things, or it's foolish or perhaps highly questionable at best ideas that we can summarize by saying, the DCCC thinks everybody who runs has to be a certain kind of candidate, or they prefer self-funders, which they do for pragmatic reasons. But then you wonder, well, how pragmatic is it if it's, once you get beyond the question of what does this person's race do to our bank account, how pragmatic is the consideration if it also leads to defeat at the polls, which also in turn affects your bank accounts, and maybe you need to take a more holistic approach to these questions. All good objections. What I think was interesting was usually when it comes to complaining about the DCCC weighing too heavily, putting its thumb on the scales really is not a bad way of expressing it. Putting its thumb on the scales when it comes to the outcome of congressional primaries. That's who you're talking about, what you're talking about when you're talking about the DCCC. The usual remedy for it, or at least suggestion, is, well, why don't you leave this to the locals to make the decision about who stands the best chance of winning in November. And of course, that's actually what's happening here. It is, as she notes, being left to the locals. The problem is it's the wrong set of locals. And here we get into a hybrid problem. Yeah, they're local, but they're not everybody local. They're not you and your neighbors and everybody else going to the polls and making a reasoned, sound decision about who will represent the party in November. They are instead, at best, a shot in the dark against rubber stamping, somebody that was approved earlier by the party apparatus. Again, there's the chicken and egg thing. If you moved your primaries earlier, there would be more call and perhaps more opportunity for wider participation and less rationale in a way for it being done in a closed system like county-wide conventions. But I guess the other thing that Lisa brought up was that in large part attendance at the conventions is determined by, or is something that's awarded to party activists. And there I hearken back to my dad's situation and the situation that we hear about all the time, and I always encourage people to do. I'm hypocritical in it because I avoid this activity myself, but we have the example, for instance, of Travis and Rachel over at Irreverent Testimony doing the exact thing we're talking about here, saying, attendance at convention goes to activists and party insiders, and those are the stuffed shirts and bigwigs of my locality at the moment, but it doesn't take a great deal to put up a challenge to some of those people or to get yourself included in that number. But it does take hard work and dedication and a willingness to put up with these nudniks one night a week for basically the rest of your life. But you will find yourself pretty quickly being one of those people. And if one is not enough, bring 10 friends with you, and pretty soon you will be in the position of either selecting the candidate or suggesting, more likely, for instance, suggesting that there be some reform about how the candidates are named so that, you don't end up doing the same thing that your predecessors did, only to find yourself in disagreement with your friends and neighbors over who is appropriately progressive or which one stands the best chance of winning. But that opportunity is available to you. It's just a mind-numbing, lifelong slog through this process. Which brings me back, I guess we'll just make one more comment, to the top of the piece and the legitimate complaint about Menendez. Having worked for Menendez, but not carrying any particular water for him, either then or now, I guess I could say. But I was struck with, I had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about his biography, working closely with him, and I was always struck by how closely he hewed to exactly that path. He came up for instance, Lisa mentions him as being one of the party bosses of the North Jersey political machine. Absolutely true. Now the question is how you get that. And it's not something typically that you're granted by birthright. Certainly not the case for Bob Menendez. There weren't any Cuban-American Democrats just handing him crowns in northern New Jersey. It was a matter of his putting that time in and going to work for the local Democratic Party organization as a reform candidate for the local county committees in Hudson County and in Union City, New Jersey, and in working to rid Union City of its then corrupt mayor and his political machine. And of course, once you topple a political machine, the opportunity is there for you to fill in the vacuum. And if you do things right, you'll be very happy with yourself. If you do something to someone else's view, in particular wrong, then you become viewed as the next political machine. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But you get to be that boss by putting in the time and spending it with the party organization and building the party organization. And, in whose image would you reconstruct a political organization? I'm sure others would say machine, but in whose image would you construct it if not your own? I mean, you try to keep things open for people, but the opportunity even for, or the goal even for the most progressive campaigners in a campaign like this one to rebuild the party in some image would be essentially to, I want to hold the doors open for others to vote. Well, yeah, that's your vision of how things should be done. It should be everybody's vision. Maybe. Yeah, possibly. Although then again, sometimes you hold the doors open for everybody to come and participate and you find out very quickly that people don't participate and decisions have to get made, and holding the doors of hundreds of polling places open at your expense for the opportunity for 1,100 people to come and cast their votes across, 28, 30, 50 different precincts becomes less and less worth it. And how about if as a reform and to save money and be careful with people's party dues and contributions, we consolidate our operations and we all meet in one place and cast those ballots? Because after all, only a couple thousand at most of us are doing it. How about if we did that and we called it a convention instead? And we gave everybody opportunities to speak instead of simply showing up and casting ballots. Shut up, write down your name, and get out of here. I mean, in one sense, having a convention is a much more open process. So, there are many different ways of looking at things. Hopefully, of course, you are able to pull this off as a reformer and keep the prospect or keep the principle of openness in place, but it doesn't always last. And sometimes you find yourself with an insurgent challenge who makes use of your openness, but toward ends that are considered either alien to the party, or perhaps I can leverage someone's openness in favor of an agenda that would close things down again too. And then the question becomes, how far do you go in violation of your principles of openness in order to keep the openness later on available for the future of the party? It's a lot of questions, and it's difficult to answer all of them. And it doesn't necessarily require that you sacrifice your entire life to go and answer those questions, but realize that those are the challenges ahead, and realize that people who have the perseverance to really pour themselves, and unfortunately a large portion of their lives, into such questions end up being the ones in position to make the calls going forward. And there's really very few other ways that you could arrange it that would make any sense. For instance, who would put up with a situation where the decision-making process was handed over to people who don't bother to show up and do anything or express any interest in things? And sometimes, that sounds terrible, but sometimes that's the actual outcome of simply opening things up and saying we're going to throw it open at large for everyone to cast a ballot. And don't worry about party registration because we want to encourage independence too. And who knows who shows up and nominates what kind of person, and do they reflect the values of progressive Democrats across the board, or even what we thought were the values of this district, or what might have been necessary to win. We don't know. And in closing, I guess we'll just say this. Let's close on an agreeing note. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Lisa, for making that contribution. The fact that I have things to say about it is a good thing and an indication that we want more from you. Not a bad thing, and it should not be taken in that light. We can agree on this. Chris Smith sucks, and he should go, and the best chance we have for doing it, I don't know who it is, but I'm going to be looking at your guy from here on in and hoping against hope that you're satisfied with the way the nominating is ultimately conducted, whether in this election or perhaps we'll have to wait until the next go-around to get things right. Thank you for sending me your contribution. Thank you for hanging in there today. Weird mix of topics for the show, no doubt, and of course much still on the table for Justice Putnam to take up in his program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next here on Netroots Radio. Stay tuned for what? I'll tell you. How about this? Baghdad Bob Dan Sr. pretends Republicans aren't really Trump supporters. I'd love to see how he carries that trick. A black Alabama woman who was denied a job because of her dreadlocks is taking her case to the Supreme Court. And
from Daily
more
Coast
after this.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Check this out. The Colorado GOP threatens to throw teachers in jail for going on strike, and the scope of the Koch brothers' influence on Trump climate policy comes under scrutiny. And let's see, what about this? Trump's con of voters will implode like his casinos, but now there are global consequences. Plus, much, much more, as always, next.